Jacob Hawley, welcome back to the Development by David podcast. How's the tour going?
It's going good, mate. It's going good. I've done two shows. I've done Brighton and Cambridge, and then tonight I'm off to Manchester, which is aside from coming to do Glasgow with you, that's one of the furthest trips I'm taking. But yeah, it's been great. It's been very different. I mean, uh, I'm trying to. When did we last speak? Was it 2022?
You came up and MC'd a gig at the Glee Club, so whenever
Oh
that
yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah. That was 2022, but I think we first chatted in 2021. But I mean, I toured last year. I did a tour last year, and that was great. It was nice, but I think the difference this year is I've done a bit more on social media now. I sort of started taking that seriously last summer, and it means that the people that are coming to see me now just know me a bit better. And it feels weird saying that they're fans, but that it feels much more like that now. Like people want pictures afterwards. People can quote bits of my old material, which freaked me out a bit. I mentioned in my new show, I mentioned my mate Big Dave that I grew up with, and people like calling out stuff that I've said about him on stage before or on TV before. Um, and I've even had people bringing me presents. There's a geezer in Brighton brought me like a bud of weed as like a present because he listens to my podcast and he's heard me talking about stuff like that. So it's been amazing, man. Like it's been really sick. Like it's just it feels like people are really connecting with what I do in a way that they weren't before. And I've made a lot of changes to the way that I work and things that I focus on a day-to-day basis. And I think that has resulted in that connection.
How did you give yourself the level of trust to expand the tour into regions such as Manchester and Glasgow? How did you know that you had an appetite in those regions? Like, I can imagine it's quite daunting
Uh,
to book a whole tour with those dates when you
I
don't
mean,
know
to be
whether.
per- to be Yeah, I mean, listen, there's still a risk, and I'm not going to lie to you. Like Manchester tonight hasn't sold as well as Cambridge or Brighton has, and a lot of what I do on social media or I do a lot more like football content and football shows. I spend a lot of my life taking the piss out of Man United, and that doesn't help you sell tickets in Manchester. It turns out that really doesn't. But to be really honest with you, there's a boring answer to that, which is that I moved agencies last summer. I moved to an American agent called UTA, and they have this sort of like magic bit of software, this tool that analyzes your following, finds the meta accounts of all the people that follow you, has a look at the information they're willing to give publicly via their Facebook accounts. And so I know where my followers live. I know what they earn. I know what they follow. I know how often they interact with my stuff. I know how old they are. I know whether they're university educated, and if so, what kind of universities. So it's a boring answer, really, mate. But that's how we've plotted this tour. Um, there was one I did a football video in September that we knew went viral around Leeds University because I suddenly got 1,000 followers within an hour, and they were all people who go to Leeds Uni. So I'd clearly gone round a WhatsApp group or something. Um, and so my agent just immediately booked a show at Leeds Uni, get sent like the students union like a sort of exclusive 10% off offer to buy tickets, and it just sold out straight away. So it's as I say, like I've sort of changed the way I work a little bit since you and I last spoke, and yeah, that's kind of resulted in us being able to do a tour, us being able to be quite precise about where the tour goes, and yeah, being a bit more agile in terms of reacting to how my following changes online and how you can sell to that following.
What else has changed since we last spoke?
I had my son, my little boy, my second child was born. Um, but I mean, that's kind of personal life. I got engaged, uh, but I think basically I I did the Edinburgh Fringe in 2022, and I had a bad time, and I think that was the beginning of a lot of things changing between my work life, my personal life, and everything else. And it took a year for every change to manifest, but now it has changed, and yeah, things are a lot better for me than they were when we last spoke. I've got a better work life balance. I think I'm a better boyfriend and now indeed fiance, better dad than I was, um, and work's going better. Yeah, so a lot has changed since then, based off that fringe going bad. If it, I mean, I'm sure you've got listeners who won't know what I'm talking about. Basically, the Edinburgh Fringe in the city of Edinburgh, they have the Edinburgh Festival, which is like the biggest arts festival in the world. Alongside that, they have what's called the Fringe Festival, which is like an open access arts festival where thousands of comedians go every summer. You know, they bring a new show, a new hour of material. It gets reviewed. You try and sell as many tickets as possible, and you try and get industry traction from doing that. And I'd been doing that since 2018. I did it in 2018 and 2019. Both times went really well. Both times kind of got what I wanted out of that in terms of work, in terms of good reviews. 2020 and 2021, there weren't any festival because of the pandemic. And then 2022, I went up and it didn't go to plan in a few ways. And so I sort of began the slow process of changing how I do things. And that's kind of resulted in where I am now.
What happened?
I just made a few little mistakes that led to having a bad time. I was in a room that was too big for me. I was in a 120 seater room at 12:15 in the afternoon, which was a bad decision. I remember I was chatting to a guy called Jordan Brooks who had won the big award, like the main award for best show in Edinburgh at the festival prior to that in 2019. And he was like, "How are you getting on with numbers?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's been tough." And he goes, "Yeah, me too." And I said, "Where are you?" And he goes, "Well, I'm in a 100 seater room at 8 o'clock." And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, "Wow, if he's in a smaller room than me at a better time and he's struggling, I've definitely made a bad decision being in a bigger room than him at a really tough time." And so I didn't get great numbers. The reviews were kind of middling, but the main thing that happened basically, I was up there. My girlfriend was back in London. She was 4 months pregnant, and she had our then 2-year-old, my daughter. And basically, she was supposed to come up for a few days in the middle of the festival. She got really sick, and to be candid, like we'd lost a pregnancy prior to that, so we were very careful and cautious about another miscarriage. And then, so she didn't come up. It meant I spent a month away from her and my kid. And then I remember, I got the train back to London. It was a miserable fringe, to be honest with you, mate. It was a miserable festival. Like there was a lot of like train strikes. The audience couldn't get up. There was a bin strike where the bin men went on strike, so the city was just literally full of shit. And I remember getting the train back and being like, "Oh, I'm back in London, thank God." And I got in the car at the train station. My girlfriend and my daughter picked me up, and my daughter just like wouldn't look at me. She hadn't forgotten me, but she was like distant. I've been away from her for a month. She was only 2. And I remember sort of saying to myself then, like, yeah, this isn't working. And I was with a management company at the time called Avalon, who are great. And they've got huge acts like Russell Howard, like Greg Davis, yeah, loads of big comedians, Lee Mack. But their model was very much to kind of send you up to Edinburgh and try and get TV work. And I'd done that for a while. And I'd done bits of TV. I'd done the Russell Howard Hour. I've been in a sitcom called Ladhood. I'd done a show called The Stand Up Sketch Show. Like I'd done a few bits and bobs of telly. There wasn't. I remember sort of thinking at the time, there's no, and this is such a mad way to think, but I was like, there's no straight white guys who've been going the same amount of time than me who've had more work. And you kind of have to think like that because, and it's correct, but opportunities do go to people from more diverse backgrounds because they want to diversify what's on television, correctly so. But it means you have to think like that, like who's getting what I'm not getting? And I was like, well, no one. But I just felt like I wasn't building fans, I've been doing it 7-8 years at the time. And I was like, I think I'm good. I think people like what I do, but for whatever reason, this isn't connecting with people. Anyway, so after 2022, I was like, right, I'm going to take this show on tour. I took the show on tour, went great, felt like it was connecting with people, blah, blah, blah. But, TV work wasn't really coming in and things were a bit slow. And I decided I wasn't going to go back to Edinburgh in 2023 because my son would have just been born and I just wanted to be a dad. I just wanted to be a good dad and a good boyfriend last year. And then while everyone else was in Edinburgh in August of 2023, doing the thing I used to do, chasing TV work and trying to build audience and try to progress their careers. I was just back in London, having a great time with my family, but just sort of ticking along. And that's when I made the decision to leave Avalon, the big management company. And I'd been with them 5-6 years. They'd got me work, they'd got me TV work. I'd been like I guess, a kind of young talent that they were really building. And so that was quite scary to say, I'm out, I need to do something different. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I needed to do that was different. And I was just felt a bit lost. And then I randomly got a message on Twitter one night from a guy called Dave Seeger, who's just an Arsenal fan who's very well connected with the club. He's written books about Arsene Wenger. And I'm a massive Arsenal fan, and I sort of, I tweet about the games and stuff. And I guess within the fan base, I'm on a long list of comedians who support Arsenal. There's loads of them. And this guy messaged me late one night being like, hey, man, the Arsenal Supporters Trust, which is the kind of fan base's official kind of, I don't know what you call it, I guess the voice of the fans. It's like an organisation. It's an official charity, but it's there to be the voice of the fans, almost like a union for Arsenal fans, the official union. He was like, look, it's our 20-year anniversary. We're doing something at the stadium in 2 weeks' time. We're going to do a kind of event at the stadium. We've asked a couple of other comedians. They're all busy. He literally said, he was like, I couldn't get Romesh. I couldn't get Rob Beckett. He said, look, the players are going to be there. The coach is going to be there. Do you want to perform? And I was like, yeah, fucking 100% I want to perform. That's definitely. So he was like, cool, sent me the details, blah, blah, blah. And I sort of prepped for it. And I sort of thought to myself, I was like, well, what I'll do is I'll write, rather than just going in and doing my usual set, which is what they'd asked for. I thought, well, let's put a bit of effort in and let's write something about Arsenal and about the season and about what's going on around the club. So I wrote this like tailored set, sort of 15 minutes about Arsenal. I got there. It was a really tough gig. I can't lie to you, man. Like it was in this kind of like corporate area in the stadium, sort of 400-500 Arsenal fans. But when I say Arsenal fans, these are the real fucking nerds. These are the anoraks. These are people that have got little badges from 1987 when we beat Liverpool. Like these, I don't want to sound harsh. These guys are freaks. Like I like Arsenal, but they like it to a level it's weird. And a few of the players were there, and the coaching staff. So I was fucking nervous, but I went on and it went really well. Like the show went great. Players that I've grown up watching coming up to me, shaking my hand at the end, asking me for my name and stuff. It was a dream. And it was only as I was leaving that I looked around and I noticed that there was cameras everywhere. They'd been filming it so that people online who couldn't get down to the stadium that night could watch it. So I said to Akil, the geezer who bit me, I was like, mate, could you get me that footage? And he said, yeah, sweet. And at the time, I'd been putting a few bits of stand-up online, but not with any real success. Just a few likes here, a few likes there. No, it hadn't grown my audience or anything. But I stuck that out online, and I'd done some stuff about sort of Arsenal podcasts and podcasters, and they shared it because I'd written about them, and that it didn't go crazy, but it got a bit of traction, enough traction that I thought, oh, hang on, this is something I can do that other people can't. I know enough about football, and I can be funny about football in ways that other people aren't really doing. So I thought this might be the thing. So then I had this plan. I was like, right, what I can do, I can write stand-up about football. I can perform it to football fans and they like it. And then I can film it and stick it online. And I said that to a couple of other Arsenal fans, like comedians who are Arsenal fans. I was like, guys, I think this is what I should do. And one of them, bless him, a guy called Luke Kempner, was like, that's fucking mental. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, that is so much effort. Like you'd have to set up a gig specifically for football fans. You'd have to sell tickets to that gig. You'd then have to write a new stuff every. He was like, just do it down your phone. Just do it to the camera. And I've never, ever, ever, ever wanted to do that. But I thought, fuck it, I'll give it a go. And then, I started doing that in kind of September last year. And a few of them went viral. And it's just ended up in building me up a not a huge following online, but a nice kind of 25,000. But they're really engaged and they really like when I talk about football. And since then, I've done other bits where I'm not talking about football. But just doing that has helped me actually build an audience in ways that TV never did. Like actually just get my stuff to them. And I think more so than that, it's helped me connect with people who look and sound like me. Like I think so much of where I was going wrong in the past is my previous management company were kind of aiming me at a kind of, I'd almost call them like a comedy class. Radio 4 listeners, people who watch Taskmaster, people who can afford to go to the Edinburgh Fringe. That's where they were pitching me, right? And those people don't want me. they don't want they don't want a guy in a Stone Island jacket with white trainers. You know, they can't connect. And I look back now and I'm like, you spent years banging your head against a brick wall trying to convert these guys to you, and you never realize that they don't look or sound like you, Jacob. How did you not spot that? Whereas now I'm doing it to, people who look and sound like me, people who go to the football at the weekends, people who, when they take too much coke and they can't sleep at night, will sit there planning the Arsenal 11 for the next weekend. Like that it's me. And the interesting thing is, I'm touring this show, and the show that I'm touring, it's nothing about football. Like there's not a second of football in there. And the shows I've done, I know there's people in the crowd who are coming to watch me because I talk about football. And I should say, it's not just videos I put on Instagram now. I do 2 Arsenal podcasts every week. I do my own podcast, which I literally just do in my spare room. I do the Kickoff, which is a football YouTube show with a guy called True Geordie. It's like the original football YouTube show. So people find me from all that stuff, but they find me talking about football. They come to the show, and I've got to be honest, the show is quite a nuanced and difficult hour-long, I guess, exploration of how our society treats people who are either gender non-conforming, LGBTQ, and how we create space for them in society. That's a hard sell to people who like me because I take the piss out of Man United. And the best thing has been that they like it. The best thing, and I think these are lads who would never be having that conversation with their mates, who'd never be confronting stuff like that, who when they hear about that in society or on the news or in a newspaper would ignore it. And that's been the most rewarding bit of the tour so far, is being able to do material like that to people who follow me because I talk about Arsenal.
Did you ever design that set or that show to cater for that group of people? Was it your plan to upskill and educate and raise awareness to that crowd, or has that just been an added benefit of you attracting the football hooligan-esque cult that you have?
I think, like, in my sets, in my stand up, and I think you and I have spoke about this before, I always try and talk about stuff like that. Like I'm quite ambitious in the topics I want to talk about, whether that be the way that people from so different social classes are treated, the way of people with different political opinions are treated, and the kind of the USP that I try and push is that I have a foot in both camps. So I think quite liberally minded left wing stuff that you would associate usually with a kind of metropolitan elite class, whereas I come from a working class. So I've always kind of liked the idea that I can talk to people who look and sound like me about things that they wouldn't normally want to talk about, if that makes sense. And I've done shows in the past that are very much defending Brexit voters and trying to create empathy for people that think in ways that people don't always like. But I think the problem was previously I was writing those shows and performing them to silver-haired Radio 4 listeners who read The Guardian. And it was very much doing those shows and people kind of stroking their chins and going, yes, I think that's a good idea. Whereas now I'm actually doing it to people that look and sound like me in a way that I never did. And I like, because they're my audience and because they know me, I trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think now I'm saying things on stage where I think 2 years ago I'd worry that I was going to get in trouble. Like I admit to things on stage that I didn't used to admit to. Like I admit on stage that I think the pronoun thing is fucking stupid. I think the idea that we all tell each other our pronouns all the time, and the theory behind that is that if when I meet David, he tells me that he's he, him, and everyone else does that all the time in society, it means that when someone who is gender non-conforming, who identifies differently to the sexual gender they were born with, tells me their pronouns, I don't blink because I'm like, oh, well, I'm just so used to everyone telling me their pronouns. That means that I can accept it easier. That has never happened to anyone I've ever met. All it does is it winds people up. It annoys people. They feel like something's been like forced down their throat, and it just creates division and hatred amongst people who have no reason to feel divided or hate toward one another. I wouldn't have the bollocks to say that to a Radio 4 Guardian crowd who've been to a better school than me, because I'd
Mm-hmm.
worry that they would think ill of me. I've got the bollocks to say that to people who look and sound like me because they know me. They know I'm not an arsehole. They know I'm saying these things with the welfare of people who are gender non-conforming in mind. I want a better world for those people. I think it's wrong that people... The average age of a trans person in the UK is in their mid-40s because of the life they have to live. Because they live in a society where so many of the country don't understand them and dislike them. And I think so much of that is down to policies that are set by cisgendered people to try and make the world a bit kinder. And it doesn't, it just winds people up. But I wouldn't have the bollocks to say that to silver-haired Radio 4 listeners, whereas I do have the bollocks to say that to football fans. And I think they listen because they trust me. So I think that's it. I mean, it's so interesting now. I think comedy's changed so much in the last few years. Like I know of so many comedians who are saying this. Like you might be aware of a guy called Finn Taylor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now Finn does a show called Finn versus the Internet. It's really blown up for him on Instagram and YouTube, and like he now again tours to his audiences, people who've watched him. And it's funny, like I've been in comedy clubs with him the last few months while he's been like writing his material, and even like comedy clubs where you can get away with a lot. You know, he wouldn't mind me saying there are times when audiences are like, "Oh bloody hell, a bit far, Finn." But he says he's like, the problem is in front of his fans, because his fans know him and trust him. They're like, no, give us more, go dirtier, go darker, go deeper. And so you almost end up in a situation where you can give your fans things you can't give anyone else because they know you. And I can't lie, it's fucking sick. Like, it's so good knowing that they trust you and knowing that you can kind of go deeper and darker. Not even darker in my sense, but just go deeper into subjects than you would with other audiences.
As a byproduct, have you seen some of your audience members or fans or following change their beliefs or enact in more virtuous behavior because of some of the things that you've either put online or said at a gig?
I don't know, and I don't. I think it would be a bit patronizing of me to say that I would want that, because that's not
It's
necessarily.
not your
I'm not
job.
trying to change anyone's mind. No, it's not my job. I'm a clown. Do you know what I mean? I'm there to make people laugh. It just happens to be that I find it more interesting and indeed more funny to do comedy about topics that I think are a bit more important, rather than just I went on a Tinder date and someone farted. Do you know what I mean? Like I like stuff that's got a bit more bite to it. But I'm certainly I don't think I want to change anyone's mind. But what I do quite like is the idea that people might consider things a little bit differently after watching me.
I had a guy on last week called David Pinsoff, who's the founder of Cards Against Humanity, and he
Oh
talks
yeah.
about why there's such a mass appeal for Cards Against Humanity. And he said it's less so of a game, but more of a comedy making machine. And when he was
Hmm.
deconstructing what stand up comedy is, he said it's a violation of an expectation. He said
Yeah.
comedy is destructive because you're disrupting the expectation of what the crowd thinks is going to come next. And I think looking at you, how you dress and how you hold yourself, the crowd won't expect you to talk about the things that you do and do it in such humor. They probably think you're going to joke about Arsenal and bevying down the boozer and getting in street fights, but in fact, you're touching on these very sensitive topics in such a profound but authentic way.
I think that's. I think good comedians should be like Simpsons characters. I think that's the best way of doing it. Is like they should have like instantly recognizable visual traits like a Simpsons character, and that like as I think you explained it brilliantly, or the guy from Cards Against Humanity did. But yeah, a good joke is essentially a surprise, and there has to be an element of surprise. And yeah, I like to think that's the kind of joke with what people get on stage with me, or the surprise almost is the subject matter coming from, and it does affect the way I dress on stage. To be honest with you, mate, it does. Like there are corporate gigs where I have to wear a suit, and I almost feel like I lose something because I like I have to dress, but I'm not a character act. Like I wear white trainers in Stone Island all year round, not just on stage. But but yeah, I think as a visual cue, it does help. I think it helps to surprise people a bit, and that's useful. I think.
Were you cautious of moving towards woke comedy, the type of woke comedy whereby the reaction to your jokes aren't laughs, they're claps? I had Rory Sutherland on the
Yeah,
podcast, who's a behavioral scientist, and that's what he describes woke comedy is where someone goes on stage, makes a joke about Trump, instead of people laughing, they applaud the statement.
yes, I never want that. I don't want anyone. I don't want anyone to ever applaud anything I say. There, and I work with a director, another comedian called Garrett Millerick.
Oh yeah,
Uh, he's amazing. But he he frequently picks me up. when he was listening to recordings or reading the script where he was like, "You're not going to get a laugh there. You're going to get applause there." And we went, "Fucking get that out now." I won't say who. I won't say who it is, but there is a comedian, quite a well-known comedian, who does seek that, who does do a lot of that. And Garrett would literally say, "You're being like him. Don't be like him." And I'd go, "Right, okay, thank you." And he literally made me. You can kind of see here. Actually, I'll show you this. So I've got a big cork board with all my writing on it. It's not on there at the moment, but there was literally a big bit of paper where in big black bold writing I had to write at the top, "Don't be like," and then enter name of comedian who your behavioral scientist would very much describe as a woke comedian, but someone who's seeking agreement rather than laughter. And
I think I know who that
I,
is.
I mean, I'll write something in the chat to you now, mate. But is that the one you guessed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know the guy, and he's a really nice guy. So I don't want to. But it's just not what I do. It's not what I want to do. I've watched like great comedians, and it's interesting. I'm talking about the trans people, people who are gender non-conforming, LGBTQ plus people, and there's plenty of times in the show where I say things that are very much taking the piss out of them, uh, because I'm a comedian. And that's the point. And ultimately, the show is about being kinder to those people. And I think the show leaves on a message of being nice to them. That I'm not an activist. Do you know what I mean? I'm not there to create policies or enforce change. I'm supposed to be a joke. And as you rightly described, the best jokes are surprises. And I think when you've actually stepped on stage and you're quite clearly trying to be kind to those people, it hits a lot harder when you take the piss out of them because it's a surprise. Yeah, that's it's not my job and it's not my mission to try and educate or try and I don't want applause. I mean, if you applaud after laughing, great, but it has to be laughter first.
For sure. When I had Jimmy Carr on the podcast a couple of days ago, that episode's not out just yet, but he spoke about how there's no such thing as like punching down. When he offends someone or he's making a joke to someone, he's bringing them into the conversation. And I see that in the crowd when for example, if I go to a gig with a gay friend and someone makes a gay joke or a homosexual joke, he laughs because he feels included in the conversation. He feels seen. He doesn't mind the piss being taken out of him or the cause that he cares about. He's just glad that he's included in the conversation in the right way.
Yeah, I think it's humanizing. I think anyone from a background where you could maybe say, "Oh, that's punching down on them." Like, if you spend your life not taking the piss out of them and going, "Oh, well, I can laugh at everyone else, but not those guys because they're the precious kind of don't no because they've had enough." If I was down the pub and everyone was talking about me like that, going, "Oh, well, we can't take the piss out of Jacob because Jacob's had it hard and we don't want to," no. I'd be like, I don't feel like one of the guy. I don't feel like one of the gang. I don't feel like I'm being treated equally. And equality isn't always what's needed. There's obviously need for equity as well, but like I think you can do stand up in a way where you can take the piss out of anyone or anything. I think it's just all about your positioning on stage. I've seen people who are just clearly arseholes, who are taking the piss out of people in a way that's nasty, and you can kind of sense that they don't like the people they're talking about. I don't know if I'd say that's punching down, but it just feels shit. It's not funny.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think you can take the piss out of anyone if you've set yourself up correctly, and often so that you're the joke as much as they are.
100%.
I mean, I'm not gonna say I know better than Jimmy Carr. Like, if he says something's right, he's right. Don't take my word over his.
And do you think there is a culture at the moment that sees comedians or sees you or someone like Jimmy Carr as a responsible person for activism? They expect them to be on a specific side's team and be the voice of that, opposed to being a jester. I feel like so many comedians are being cancelled due to this culture because a journalist is taking a specific joke out of context and framing it as a belief opposed to a gag.
I think part of the problem with that is that, and I'm not sure who's to blame for this, whether it's commissioners, producers, or the comedians themselves. But I think so often comedians are put in positions where their job is to give an opinion. rather than to be funny.
Mm.
And I've made that mistake in the past. I did a series called Jacob Hawley on Drugs, which I was really proud of, and I still kind of am. And the idea was to make a series that was like, it was for BBC Sounds, and the idea was to make a series that was like a funny take on UK drug culture. Because it was BBC, it kind of couldn't be. Like, we had to be responsible. There was like an editorial content guideline that we had to fit on. So I had to be quite earnest with it. Now, I would understand if someone who's listened to like 20 episodes of that podcast of me being fairly earnest, if they heard me say something potentially problematic, I can understand them being like, whoa, that's a bit out of order. Why are you saying that? And if I turned around and went, oh, I'm joking, I'm a comedian, I can understand if they were like, well, you don't usually sound like you're joking because you usually sound quite earnest. You usually sound like you mean what you're talking about. And I
Mm.
think that's the problem. I think nowadays, like, how often is there a fucking comedian on Question Time? You know? How often are comedians sharing petitions on the internet? Or like not being funny about the Tory party, but just being upset about them. And I think that's the problem, is our voice has kind of been muddied by sincerity. And I think sincerity has a place in comedy. I think you can be sincere and still be funny, but I think when so much of what you're receiving from a comedian is like sincere earnestness, about what they think, they then don't have the ability to go, oh, by the way, I'm a comedian, I'm joking. You can't say what I say seriously. It's like, well, you've been asking us to sign fucking petitions. You weren't joking then, were you? So I
Mm.
think that's the problem nowadays, is that there's such a mix of kind of sincerity in what comedians put out. Like, I know I've got a mate called Elliot Steele. Do you know Elliot?
Yeah, I've seen some of his TikToks and content online.
He's gone viral a few times, and he does this kind of similar thing to me of like, talking into the phone and blah blah blah. But he has made a real, especially in the last few years, Elliot. He's done a really good job. Every time he walks on stage, one of the first things he says is, "I'm a fucking idiot." And as a qualifier, that's as good as it gets, because then no one can take anything you say seriously. He walks on stage, he goes, "I'm a fucking idiot." And then he can say what he likes, because you can't take it seriously. He's not asking you to take it seriously. He's told you he's stupid. And he's not stupid, but that's the character. In the same way that there's an Irish comic, really, a guy I love, a really good mate called Mike Rice. I don't know if you've
Oh,
heard of
yeah,
Mike
yeah,
Rice.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Again, brilliant. And again, similar to me and Elliot, bits and bobs online, just selling tours from that. He doesn't want to do TV work. But like, Mike walks on stage, and like every 3 or 4 minutes, Mike says, "I'm a creepy little Irish man. I'm a weird little Irish guy now." And it means that when he says something about fucking his uncle, you're not taking it seriously, because he's telling you every 4 minutes, "Don't worry about this. I'm just playing the character of the weird Irish guy." They're not sharing petitions. They're not earnestly talking about how the Tories have got people eating out of food banks. They're never kind of, they're not sharing things about the world and going, "We need to stop this government doing what they're doing." And so no one ever confuses what they're saying as being serious or sincere. They are clowns, and the things they say are treated as such.
I think the differentiator is that people are viewing that on stage and there is context, which is a comedy club. Whereas if you're posting face to the camera videos online from your home, making jokes about a specific subject, because you're doing it from your home, I wonder if there's a subliminal signal that this is who I am. Whereas when you're on stage, you're clearly
Maybe,
playing a character.
maybe. I mean, I've. It's interesting. I've Elliot. Elliot had a guy called Mukhtar, who I don't know who this is, but he's quite a high profile left wing tweeter, and he went after Elliot. I can't remember why. I have no idea why. He sort of tried to call on his followers to cancel Elliot. He sort of sent them after him, and he found a clip of Elliot doing something jokey on a podcast. But because all of Elliot's tweets are joking, because Elliot was clearly joking on the podcast, and because the way Elliot responded to this guy was joking as well, it's like they just had to give up, because they were like, "Well, this is all a joke. We can't get anywhere. He's never going to take us seriously as us being offended by him. So what's the point?" And I remember it's a thing that Trump said years ago of like, never apologize and never back down. And I don't want to I don't want to cite Trump as being correct, but like, if you just stay in character, they can't cancel you. If you, like, Norm Macdonald was like this. Anytime he ever pushed it a bit too far, He would just keep joking and stay in character. And as soon as you go earnest, they've got you. But if all of your output is comedic, what is there to cancel? You're a joke, and so they can't pretend that any of it is to be taken seriously.
That's what Jimmy was saying the other day when defending himself during cancellation for some of the jokes that he said as soon as you start defending the joke or you start defending yourself, then it becomes a belief, and then that's when they've got you. And I'm reminded
Exactly.
of
Exactly.
Matt Rife recently. Remember Matt Rife
Yeah.
and his
Yeah.
cancellation attempt because he made. I mean, he definitely did change his tone of voice on that Netflix special, but it was one of the domestic abuse jokes that really got him kind of thrown under the bus. And there's a couple of considerations that take place for me as to why he got cancelled, opposed to a Jimmy Carr, for example, who has way darker jokes than Matt Rife. And it's because I think a lot of Matt Rife's fan base were like 80%, 90% women. And not only was he being valued for being a stand up comic, but he was also valued based on his looks, to which he would
Yeah.
lean into on stage. And when he changed tone for his Netflix special, I think because he's been valued on appearance over humor, because I don't think he's particularly that funny, in my opinion. I think because his first order is looks, second order is humor, I think that's why he suffered a greater effect in comparison to a Ricky Gervais, for example, who wouldn't get cancelled for similar jokes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the guy's had cheekbone implants. You know that, like, you can't do that and then put your hands up and go, "I'm just joking. I'm just a silly guy." It's like, no, you want to be quite seriously fucked by a lot of women. Do you know what I mean? Like, you put a serious, and it's like, I think that's another thing of like comics. You have to consider that side of yourself of like, do you want to come across as attractive? Because being attractive is another thing that detracts from you being comedic. You
Yeah.
know, there's nothing funny about being gorgeous. Even if you think of like comedians who are like specifically attractive in years, got like a Russell Brand, Shagger of the Year, and there's some dark connotations that come with that now, but like he wasn't traditionally attractive, like he wasn't
He
like
was,
Johnny Bravo, muscly cheekbones, he looked nuts, and that it was funny,
again, it's that violation of expectation. No
Yes, it's all
stand
that.
up,
It's
like,
all that.
yeah, and if you look both visually and mentally, if you go to a comedy club, it's a room full of misfits. There's not
Yep.
a out of the box stereotype of what a comedian looks like. The only commonality is that they're misfit. Whereas if you think about a football or a UFC fighter, you can kind of picture the archetype of what that looks like.
Exactly. And I know comedians who've kind of blown up online, who are now kind of veering into that influencer space, who are doing the kind of classic glow up of getting good looking, and it's detracting from how funny they are. Like, I I sort of said to my missus when tickets started selling and stuff, I was like, maybe I'll get an Invisalign, because I do get a lot of people taking the piss out of my teeth online. And then I was like, I can't, because that's too serious. It's like, I need them to be able to take the piss out of me. I was like, oh, maybe I'll get my hair done. Maybe I'll get the hairline sorted. I was like, no, you can't, because that's what people take the piss. And that's the point. Like, it's also, I've noticed this, especially with like the football content I do, because a lot of it is me taking the piss out of players or fans or clubs, blah, blah, blah. And I get people sending me stuff back, like responding. Because you forget that, like, insulting someone's football club is like consulting their wife or their religion. That's how seriously people take it. And so the stuff people say to me, especially when it first really blew up, it was horrendous. Like, some of the stuff people were saying. But then, like, all you had to do was reply with a smile, and they're just, oh yeah, it's all just banter. We're having a laugh. I've got to come see you soon, mate. The amount of tickets I've sold from doing that, it's fucking nuts. I remember I had one guy, and he messages me all the time. I've got a few who like message me a lot, and this guy came because I remember after I sort of first blew up, I put up a story being like, hey guys, where should I come on tour? And with like as the sort of question box. And this guy replied being like, up your own arse, you fucking idiot. And I shared it because I found it so funny. I was like, that's really funny. And he was like, haha, nice one, mate. I actually think you're quite funny. He's come and seen me. And it, like, but then that's the same thing of what you're talking about. It's the contract of like you're being a joke. You're part of the joke. You can be the butt of the joke because you're the comedian. As soon as you raise your status as being like, I'm attractive, I'm good looking, I'm someone you want to have sex with, I'm someone you want to look like, you can't then be like, I'm only joking, because it's like, well, no, you that's not the status you've given yourself. You've given yourself the status of being someone who we want to be like. You can't then
Mhm.
say things that are deliberately problematic, which we wouldn't say. So I think it's exactly as you say, mate. It's like an unspoken contract between audience and performer of what they expect from you. And when you break that, that's when you're fucked.
And all a laughter is a signal of whose side you're on. So if you laugh back with the person that has commented, you're on their side. You're friends. You're bonding through laughter.
Yeah,
I've heard
yeah,
that a laughter is the shortest distance between two friends. So by you responding in jest, like you have gained a connection, and I think that's one of the reasons why they come along to your shows. It's a very similar reason to why I think all businesses should have a really good customer complaints line, because a
mm,
customer complaints line is the closest distance between a consumer and the organization. And if you can resolve a really painstaking thing that they're going through, a really painstaking perception of the brand, and you can resolve that, you can turn something that's instantly negative to a positive and acquire a retaining customer. And I think it's the same for comedy. If you get some sort of abuse or some sort of joke in your DMs, and you can turn that around into something humorous or play on their side and admit to be the dummy or wrong or ugly or whatever else, I think you can turn equally a hater into a
100%.
fan.
I mean, I've got another example, and this is from a slightly different area of my life, and I won't dwell on it too much. But basically, 4 or 5 years ago, when I first made a bit of money from comedy, my best mate is a barber, and he wanted to start his own barbershop, his own business. And he was like, look, would you put some money in and be a business partner with me, blah, blah, blah. So I did that. And we now have two barbershops and a bar that I'm involved in. I don't have a huge involvement, but I kind of sit on the board of directors. Well, it's just me and him, but we've got like 15 employees, and we've got two barbershops and a bar. And it's sick. But to your point, we have a guy who's a trainee at the moment, who's a kind of apprentice barber, and he's just started charging money for haircuts. But and this is from experience of doing this a few times now, we say to him, we were like, if you ever feel like you've got anything wrong, immediately offer to not charge them and for them to come back for free. Because you fixing something is much more rewarding in terms of your customer relationship than you just giving them what they initially expected. It's almost better for you to get it wrong than to fix it for free. Like those guys always come back. If you fuck it up but then you fix it, those guys will come back forever. If you just give them what they wanted, and that kind of applies on stage. Like I again, coming back to why I try and do the more serious subjects on stage, it's that thing of like, if you go to a comedian, they just make you laugh about any old stuff. It's like, yeah, he made us laugh. It's like, what I like is when people say to me afterwards, they were like, I really didn't think you were going to be able to make that funny. When they're like, when you were talking about how, there's so many people in the UK who don't like trans people and they've got an average life expectancy in the 40s. People will say, I didn't know when that was going to get funny. And the fact that you made it funny, you fixed something that we thought was broken. And I think that creates a better, long-standing. This is like my business mind kicking in, but like a better, long-standing kind of customer relationship.
I think you're so right. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I was thinking, how do you convert your racist uncle to become more equitable and understanding and um, compassionate towards people of different ethnic origins? Or how do you convince your friend who's a homophobe to be inclusive of other friends who are homosexual? Well, I think you deliver the message through a role model whose voice that they like. So the amount of times I've been to a comedy gig and learned about some of the problems that perhaps my sister's facing as a woman through a female comedian has been
Yes.
amazing, because it's a figure that or a domain that I enjoy consuming, but I'm consuming
Mm.
something very knowledgeable through that domain. I think it's why, unfortunately, so many young men gravitated towards Andrew Tate. Like, young men don't have many role models, but Andrew Tate was saying you can become rich, you can become ripped, and you can be attractive. And here's the vehicles that I'm going to display to showcase that, which was fast cars and yacht holidays and beautiful
Yeah,
destinations.
yeah.
I think that's the negative side of that. But for me, if I were trying to upskill my son on a specific social cause or even any sort of education, I would get their favorite cartoon character, for example, or their favorite
Yeah,
YouTuber, and try and find messages, positive messages through their content and display it to them, because it's going to be way more palatable than me trying to teach it down to that individual. And I think comedy is such a good vehicle for that. And like I said, I've learned through so many amazing women comedian some of the issues that my sister unfortunately has to face, or fortunately has to go through too.
absolutely. I have a bit where I kind of talk about this on the stage a bit, where I've had people in the past say to me, as a straight white guy, you shouldn't be talking about gender issues, or as a straight white guy, you shouldn't be talking about the issues that LGBTQ people face. And like my response to that is always like, well, all of the issues those people face, all of the problems they face within other people, is very often straight white guys that are the problem. And we can carry on doing it your way, where they turn on TV and they see someone from an LGBTQ background talking about how badly they're treated and they ignore it. Or you can hire someone like me, the lad whisperer, to talk their language. And my director, when we were working on this, he was like, "It's the same way if you're at war with another country and you have to negotiate with their people, you have to hire a translator. You can't keep talking in English because they don't like it because you're at war." And it is that thing of like you have to speak in terms that people are open to. You can't just continue speaking in a way that people are ignoring. And I think that is the way. And I completely agree with you, mate. There are so many issues that I've learned about that other people face from different backgrounds to me that I've only learned about through stand up. I've only learned about it through other stand ups sharing. I mean, so much of the stuff that, so much of the reason I wanted to talk about people who are gender non-conforming is another performer, and I won't name them, but they did a podcast called the Comedian's Comedian Podcast, which is a podcast run by a guy called Stuart Goldsmith. And this other performer, this other comedian, they went on this show. They talked about growing up, being born a girl, but never feeling correct in that body, and sort of crying to their mum at the age of 4, saying, "I just wish I could be a boy. I don't. I'm not a girl. Why can't I be a boy?" And I remember listening to that, and you know, to my shame, I it's the first time I'd really related to someone having that issue. And I imagined if one of my children was going through that kind of gender problem in it, and I was like, "Oh my god, that must be so horrendous." But I'd never considered it, and it was only through that performer talking in terms of their material that I was like, "Oh, of course." And there are so many societal things that I only understand because of comedy, and I think comedy, it's like it's got such potential to communicate things that people wouldn't usually be open to communicating about.
I think comedy forms such an integral role in society. I think even using comedy to band-aid some trauma and some darkness in your life is amazing. The reason I picked up stand-up comedy after seeing you at 21 Soho as my first live gig ever attending, the reason I picked it up was because I lost my mum 6 months before that, and I was never
Mm,
able to process the grief until I
mm,
started making jokes about it. I started writing material about it. I could revisit some of the facets that I saw between getting a phone call saying that my mum was having a heart attack to then watching it happen and the aftermath of that. I was able to revisit it through comedy because I
mm.
could see it through a different perspective. I could interrogate and play with the edges of it, because it was less sensitive and factual. I was almost playing in hyperbole. And I think when you take a subject such as grief or any of the issues that we've spoken today and change the frame in which we visit it or revisit it, I think you can shed a very different light on that subject, therefore raise more awareness of it and probe deeper because you're coming from a side of humor or experimentation almost.
Yeah, and it feels safer, right? It feels a bit safer because you're not trying to get to a point of sincere emotional connection. You can skate around it with jokes and dip into it where you wish, and I think it's almost more cathartic sometimes than it would be just to talk about those things.
Definitely. You were speaking about your businesses taking off and now being part of a bar. Since we last spoke, you were just in the barbering game. I love some of your content about how your current existence has changed socioeconomically. One of your famous reels is you talking about how you used to put drugs up your bum and now you go to farmers market. Was that symbolic of actually your current existence?
100%, 100%. I mean, I mean, that's a bit of stand up. The reel that you refer to, it's a joke that I do on stage that I just did down the camera, and it went a bit viral. But yeah, look, I've gone from
Can
being
you explain the joke on the podcast? I think it's quite
yeah,
funny.
sure. So I basically within the reel, I say the highlight of my weekends used to be visiting a man called Sticky under a bridge to purchase magical powders and going to a warehouse party and disgracing myself. The highlight of my weekends now is going to a farmer's market to meet a man called Edmund to purchase eggs from chickens that are so free range they've done the Duke of Edinburgh award. And it's true. And one thing I didn't mention is the fucking eggs cost more than the powders used to. The eggs are more expensive than, but that's my life, man. And it's, I talk about it a lot on stage, but like, we live in Islington in North London, famously middle class part of town. My daughter goes to a lovely school where all the other parents are millionaires. All the other parents own property around here. We're the only renters. We've got the smallest place. Yeah, it's that is my life. I don't get on it in the ways that I used to, and it's just a timing thing. Like I've had people say to me in the past, "Oh, have you made a real big decision then to not, drink and take drugs the way you used to?" No, if anything, I want to do it more. But I spend my life either looking after my kids or performing to earn money. And this is, I said again, I've said this a million times, but it's another thing I talk about on stage. But like, the closest I get to a night out now is getting a train back from a gig, having 6 tins and a weed edible on the train, and just texting my mates on WhatsApp. Like that's the closest I get to going for a beer with my friends now. It's sad, but it's especially. I mean, this is something I didn't really think about, but like when I did that Arsenal gig in the summer, because that used to be my one kind of night out, day out. I would still get is going to the football. And I remember walking back from the football from the Emirates after I'd done the gig there. I was walking back with one of my best friends, a guy called Joe, who I've been going to Arsenal games with. We sit next to each other. We've been going for like 6-7 years together. And I remember him saying to me afterwards, this is before I'd released the content, this before I'd started doing any content online, before I'd started doing all the football shows I do. I remember him saying to me, he was like, that went really well. And I was like, oh, thanks. And he was like, you could definitely do this. He was like, you could definitely do football content. You could talk about football for a living. You could do all the podcasts. You could do YouTube. You could do all that. And I said to him at the time, I was like, oh, mate, I'd never want to do that because this is my fun time. This is my night out. This is my release from work. I wouldn't want this to become work. And then you get an offer to do it for money and you take it. And so that is absolutely what's happened. I mean, I went to the Arsenal game on Tuesday night. That was the first Arsenal game that I've used my season ticket for since early October because I work them all now. I work for Arsenal. I do their YouTube channel, or I do True Geordie, or I've done BT Sport a few times this season. And it's bittersweet because when I send an invoice to Arsenal, my club that I've supported since I was a kid, I have to pinch myself because I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm doing what I love to do for my football club that, every birthday I've ever had, all I've asked for is an Arsenal shirt. But the flip of that is I don't get to go and watch games with my mates. I don't get to go and have fun. And I miss it. I do miss it, but I've got kids to feed. I've got things to pay for. I've got a wedding to pay for. And you can't turn down work.
Mate, that's beautiful. Given the fact that during the Fringe you felt disheartened, disengaged with a fan base, you weren't being offered the TV appearances that maybe others were, and you weren't on the right stream of audience, and you were giving yourself a hard time about it. You're perhaps comparing yourself to others or where you thought you'd be through your management, and now you have taken a very radical left step and perhaps not doing the traditional live at the Apollos or BBC panel shows, but you're performing stand up in domains that you really care about, Arsenal and on podcasts, and you're touching the lives of everyday people that you grew up with. I think that's a greater metric of success than any sort of
100%.
objective measure of success would be like TV or radio shows, etc.
This is the thing. I did the TV. I did the radio shows. I don't feel like anyone really did much more of that than I did. I did most of it. It's just it didn't. I mean, no one fucking watches them for a start. Like I've got a good friend, Red Richardson. I don't know if you know that guy. He's the Stay Toxic, the guy with the mustache and the kind of Pablo Escobar haircut. I don't know if you'd have seen that guy. Many people will. He does these funny videos where he goes Stay Toxic at the end of it. He's got like 350,000 followers now. And but we got trained the other day, and we both done bits of TV, and we went back and looked at like the ratings of like TV shows we used to do, and it's like it would get like 50,000 views when they went out, some of the TV shows, and it's like if either of us stuck out a reel now that only got 50,000 views, we'd take it down. Like it's just it. I just think I've found a way of connecting to people that look and sound like me, and I it was so unplanned and accidental. And I do feel I don't think I even realised that I was a bit lost. Do you know what I mean? I don't think I really realised that I'd sort of lost my way or not or lost direction a bit. And I almost feel like my club found me and rescued me a bit. As cheesy as that sounds, I feel like Arsenal came and got me. I feel like Arsenal were like, right, you just lost your way a tiny bit. We're just going to take you and we're just going to put you in front of the right people, and it will make a difference. And now, yeah, it's what's really important to me is that I've not changed what I was doing. Like I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. I'm. It's not like if I was touring a show about Arsenal, I'd be a bit like, oh, you've not sold out, but I'd be a bit like, oh, you've given up. You know, if I was touring a football show and going around talking about football to people, I'd be like, well, you gave up. You tried to do serious stand up about serious topics. You tried to do your important shows, and it didn't work. So now you're just giving up and you're a football guy. Whereas that's not what I've done. I with the football stuff, I try and be funny in the way that I'd normally be. And once people are on board, they're getting what I've been doing for years, and that's what means the most to me, I think.
There's an amazing quote by a guy called Alex Hermosa. You might have seen some of his podcast stuff on your feed.
Yeah, I know.
Um, but here's a quote that's you've already achieved goals you said you would you've already achieved goals you said would make you happy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have. And I think I think most people have. I think what's changed is like I just think about what actually makes me happy now, and I think what really makes me happy is just connecting with people who care about what they're watching or listening to or enjoying. Rather than aiming for a fan base that would never really like there are so many people who I think there's a kind of core comedy audience in the UK who watch Live at the Apollo, who watch Taskmaster, who listen to Radio 4, who listen to the Off Menu podcast, and those guys are never going to love me. Do you know what I mean? I could spend 3 decades. I could have stayed with Avalon for 2 more decades. I could have spent years. I could have done Taskmaster. They'd have never loved me. But what I've realised is I have to get people who look and sound like me, who will. And I have to say, it's one thing to say for going with football fans and doing stuff in that space. Football fans are fanatics. They're used to spending thousands of pounds a year uh, supporting what they care about and what they love. They know how to do fandom properly. And again, I didn't design it; it was a complete accident. But that it's a really good group of people to try and appeal to.
Mate, I'm just so happy to see that unfold and for that to be actualized. When I think about
Thank you.
seeing you in London a couple of years ago, when you were talking about class on stage to a group of audience members in Soho, who all owned their own houses, and I could see them like you not
Yes.
connecting with that group of audience members, but then there was a part of me that connected with you, and I can't remember what Ed Gamble said on stage that evening, but I can remember exactly what you said, and as a result, we have become friends. I've seen you perform in Glasgow, and full circle moment, I performed a podcast there with Jimmy Carr in the exact same venue, and now you're coming to Glasgow, and you've asked me to open for you,
And
which
you're
is
supporting
fantastic.
me, man. You're supporting me. How sick is that? I mean, like, mate, I'm fucking buzzing to see because I've obviously seen bits of your stuff. You've sent me a couple of clips and that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're going to do in a longer set now.
But it's insane that you speaking to me and your tone, touching the topics that you wanted to speak about on that day, propelled me onto enacting a complete new discipline, which was stand up comedy. And as a result, I've dedicated myself to that craft alongside the podcast and my day job. And like you said, I get the opportunity to test myself for 15 minutes, something that I've not stretched towards yet. And you're the facilitator of that, mate. So I appreciate that a lot.
Oh, mate, listen, I appreciate you connecting with me, and I think it's a testament to sticking to your guns. I think you stick to who you are, and it's a very cheesy message, but I think it's just like there. I think what the internet is teaching everyone is there is an audience for everything now. There is an audience out there, and I think that's the beautiful thing. Is like if you're only gonna let yourself be seen by older people at a fringe festival or traditional comedy fans on a TV show, maybe you'll never find them. But if you can use the internet to cast the net a bit wider, you will find people who connect with you. Um, and that's it's a really nice thing.
This episode will be going live before you arrive in Glasgow, so let's pump some tickets out. Let's see if we can get some Developed by David listeners along. What should they expect for your show when they come to Glasgow or any other date?
They're going to see a man on stage who isn't who isn't scared of talking about bigger topics, but is doing it in a very fucking stupid way. I don't claim to be an expert on anything, but we'll talk about some stuff that maybe people wouldn't expect to talk about, and we'll do it in a way that's funny. And maybe people will feel a bit differently afterwards. Maybe they won't, but they'll laugh. I can promise that they'll laugh, and they'll have a good time.
And alongside that, they'll get to see me die a Mars for 10, 15 minutes.
Mate, you're going to smash it. You're going to kill it. But I think that's going to be a nice thing for them to see. They're going to get to see you doing your thing too. And I think people who've listened to you podcasting. It's a very different thing doing stand up, and they'll get to see a different side of you as well.